My son-in-law, Nathan. Nothing. The room froze. My name echoed in the marble silence. I didn't flinch, but my wife did. And that's when I knew the betrayal wasn't his. It was theirs. They read Harold's will on a Tuesday morning, just after the rain. Lawyer, some third-generation trust manager from Sacramento, cleared his throat and repeated it again, like maybe I hadn't heard it right the first time. Mr. Nathan Blake is not included in the final testamentary transfer of estate assets or corporate equity. No land. No shares, no stake in Halden Grove Organics, the company I helped build from its first barn to its fourth distribution center. He'd been married to his daughter, Evelyn, for 9 years, worked beside Harold for 6, helped him survive a heart attack, held his hand when his wife passed. He used to call me his second son, and now, apparently, I wasn't worth a paragraph. Evelyn squeezed my hand. Her grip was tight, performative, like she knew what this meant. Her brother, Drew, couldn't hide his smirk. Of course he was in the will. Of course he'd gotten control. He never did a single goddamn thing for the company, but he had the last name. When the lawyer handed out the official copies, I watched Evelyn's face as she pretended to look shocked. Her eyes didn't search the pages. They knew what was written there. They'd known for weeks. Afterward, people lingered, in that fake, wine-sipping way people do at rich family tragedies. The estate smelled like lavender and old rugs. Photographs of Harold from younger, prouder years hung along the staircase, one of them with me, covered in soil, holding the first test crop we grew together. I stood in the same spot where that photo was taken. Everything around me felt like a stage. And I realized, they hadn't just cut me out of the will, they'd rewritten me out of the family. At night, I packed one bag, left Evelyn asleep in her separate wing of the house. She'd requested her own quarters, for focus, 3 years ago. I drove to my old apartment above a forgotten winery on the edge of Walnut Grove. And I opened Harold's old iPad, the one he'd left at my place after a work trip 6 months before his death. Passcode, my birthday. Inside, notes, project blueprints, private messages, and one document last edited 4 weeks before he passed, revised will, draft 4, and there it was. Transfer of 38% equity to Nathan Blake upon my death. For service, loyalty, and vision. My hands didn't shake. They burned, not because I'd been erased, but because I knew now, they had to forge that silence. Because the truth was too loud. Part 2, they changed the will, after he died. Location, Blake's old apartment, Walnut Grove, California, 2:47 a.m. The original draft was clean. Metadata confirmed it, saved 6 weeks before Harold's death. Edited only once, by him. No one else had access. The version they read in that fake solemn ceremony, completely different. Sanitized, strategically redacted. They didn't just remove me, they rewrote his legacy. I compared both files line by line. Draft 4 had specific bequeathments, 38% equity in Halden Grove Organics to me, 20 acres of the East Lot, land I personally restored, executive transition authority, in case of unfit successors, gone. All gone. In the final version, Drew got the company, Evelyn got the properties, I got thank you for your service. What they didn't expect, that Harold was meticulous. He saved everything, even when he forgot he did. He trusted me to clean up his digital messes. I'd been syncing his files for years. At dawn, I'd compiled 6 cloud backups, 3 local drafts, and 1 email chain between Harold and his attorney, dated 4 days before his stroke. Subject line, confirming Blake as successor in Phase 2. Attached, the same, Draft 4. They hadn't beaten me. It just deleted me, and now, I was undeleting myself. I emailed Lena Watts, the toughest estate attorney in Northern California. She didn't take calls, she took leverage. I gave her full access to the files. Let her run chain of custody reports, timestamps, even biometric login logs Harold used on his tablet. He called me 11 hours later. This isn't just forgery, she said. It's fraud, coordinated and notarized post-mortem forgery. I've seen 2 of these in 20 years. One ended in prison, the other ended in complete asset reversal. I asked how long it would take. She said, longer than revenge, but shorter than legacy. Back at the estate, Evelyn was throwing a press event. Family vision for the future of Halden Grove. They used Harold's name, his picture, even his quotes, the ones I ghostwrote for him during the last 5 quarterly meetings. I didn't call. I didn't show up. I just emailed Drew an old photo of the East Lot, Harold and I, shoveling compost. Caption, funny thing about soil, it remembers who touched it. He didn't reply, but within 24 hours, their lead supplier dropped out of contract renewal, and the game began. They threw a gala, Halden Grove Reimagined, a black tie tribute to Harold's so-called legacy, complete with vineyard charcuterie, a photo booth themed like an old barn, and a new product line, flash frozen heirloom vegetables, sealed with Evelyn's smiling face on every box. They didn't even know how to plant carrots, but they sure knew how to sell them. Drew gave a speech, talked about innovation, about trust, about keeping the family vision alive. The same man who once called farming peasant work in a bar in Lake Tahoe. Meanwhile, I was renting a 30-acre plot of drought-resistant land just outside Sacramento, land Harold once marked as viable but underleveraged in a spreadsheet from 2019. Nobody wanted that soil, but I didn't need perfection. I needed roots. I called in Gabriel Tran, a soil microbiologist I worked with in grad school. We got to work, rebuilding Harold's original AI-linked crop rotation system, testing the heirloom seed strains he never got to market, using a proprietary moisture-sensing tech they didn't even know he patented under my name. We called the company East Lot. No press, no funding splash, just sweat, real growth. Evelyn went on a podcast, said Drew restored the company to its true DNA. I clipped the quote, added it to a folder titled, Evidence of Unfit Successors. Meanwhile, Lena was working the long game. Discovery requests to the law firm that executed the will. Background checks on the notary who filed the changes. Quiet conversations with two former assistants who'd been let go mysteriously the day after Harold's funeral. Then, one night, Gabriel walked into the shed we'd converted into a command post and said, "You're gonna want to see this." He pulled up a procurement record. One of Halden Grove's biggest suppliers had just listed their majority shares, anonymously. Price, high, but not impossible. The seller, a holding firm connected to Evelyn's campaign consultant, likely liquidating to free up her cash flow for political donations. She was planning a run for local office. Bad timing. I bought the shares, under a shell LLC, then signed them to East Lots Trust, the same trust Harold and I had created for sustainable scaling before he died. In one move, I'd acquired their entire cold chain logistics system, 3 key exclusive crop distribution routes, and the right to prioritize fulfillment in 7 counties. Within 3 weeks, Halden Grove products were late. Customers complained, but Evelyn smiled through it all on TV, because she didn't know yet that the man she'd cut out of the will was now holding her supply chain by the throat. Thing about agriculture, it's not just land, it's timing, it's temperature, it's relationships. Halden Grove didn't know how much of their operation relied on people who used to shake Harold's hand in the dirt, not boardrooms. I did, and they still remembered me. The supplier I'd bought quietly, North Valley Cold Transport, handled 42% of Halden Grove's produce shipments in Northern California. I sat in their distribution center one Friday afternoon, watching crates of organic spinach roll down a conveyor belt. Their operations manager walked over. "So you're the new owner?" I nodded. "Halden Grove doesn't know." I shook my head. He grinned. "Well, they'll feel it soon enough." By month's end, I'd secured minority stakes in a seed coating factory in Fresno, a packaging plant in Redding, a greenhouse complex in Merced. Each time, I used a different shell, registered out of Delaware or Wyoming, clean on paper, untraceable to Blake. By the time Halden Grove's CFO realized their vendor costs were climbing, I was collecting rent from 4 layers of their supply chain. Then came the first delay. A crate of Halden fresh carrots showed up half-rotted at a flagship grocer in San Diego. Photos hit Twitter. Within 48 hours, the store pulled all Halden Grove SKUs pending quality review. I didn't tweet, didn't comment, just watched Evelyn's media consultant draft a damage control press release. An isolated incident. Logistics error. We take full responsibility. But she couldn't, because she didn't know who was behind the delay. One night, I drove back to the estate, parked just outside the property line, watched the old family home glow in soft amber through the orchard trees. Inside, I could see Drew pacing, yelling into a phone. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the script. Their costs were up, their margins were down, and their perfect control, cracking. The next morning, Evelyn called me. First time in 6 months. Her voice was calm, practiced. "Hey, Nathan, I heard from someone you're working on something out in East Lot." I said nothing. she continued. I know we've had our differences, but you were always a good strategist. Maybe there's something we could collaborate on. I almost laughed. Instead, I said, you know Harold called that soil sacred. He used to say it grew truth. Long pause. What do you want, Nathan? I replied, to let the truth grow, and to watch everything fake around it wither. Then I hung up. It was inevitable. Once East Lot hit market, with our first release of bio-enhanced heirloom radishes, yes, radishes, Harold's favorite joke crop, Halden Grove responded the only way they knew how. With lawyers. The cease and desist letter came in stiff, embossed paper, signed by a firm that used more Latin than logic. Unauthorized use of proprietary agricultural technology belonging to Halden Grove Organics. The irony, that technology, the irrigation timing algorithm, was mine, filed 2 years prior, co-signed by Harold Whitmore, filed under my name, from my IP address, with Harold's biometric verification. In court, their attorney, a gray-haired shark named Melcroft, argued that I had stolen the soul of the company. I let him talk. Let him gesture. Let him call me opportunistic. Let him quote phrases I'd once written for Harold's speeches, as if they were scripture. When it was my turn, I nodded to Lena. She opened a single folder. Inside, U.S. Patent #hashtag 11.802.344, Soil Adaptive Irrigation with Yield Feedback Loop, filed 17 months before Harold's death. Inventors, Nathan Blake, Harold Whitmore. Ownership, 100% Blake Agricultural Systems, LLC. Stamped, signed, federally sealed. The courtroom went quiet. Even Evelyn, seated 3 rows behind Melcroft, wearing a sharp black blazer like a widow mourning a legacy, blinked. Once, then never again. The judge read through the document, then looked at me. Mr. Blake, are you claiming this system forms the core of East Lot's current output? No, Your Honor, I replied, just its roots. And the plaintiff had access to this technology? Not anymore. Verdict, case dismissed, with prejudice, and the court formally recognized me as co-inventor and sole owner of the irrigation system still running on 72% of Halden Grove's active acreage. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. I said nothing, but Lena did. Sometimes people inherit land, sometimes they inherit lies. Mr. Blake, he built something better, with the truth. And just like that, the tide turned. In one day, Halden Grove's stock dropped 9.4%. Their licensing deal with Agrinova was paused. Evelyn's PR consultant posted, then deleted, a vague tweet about misplaced trust. Meanwhile, East Lot's inbox flooded with requests. Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, a Michelin-starred chef in Napa who wanted the carrots the court ruled honest. Harold once told me, the law can't grow a crop, but it can prune a rotten tree. Looks like it just did. Board meetings used to be Harold's symphony. He sat at the head of the long oak table, sleeves rolled, soil still under his fingernails. He didn't use buzzwords. He used results. The directors respected him, not because he was polished, but because he delivered real growth. Now, his daughter ran the show like a TED Talk. And this morning, it ended in silence. Evelyn stood at the front of the boardroom with a slide deck titled, Halden Grove 2.0, A Modern Legacy. Beneath it, a bright, hollow slogan, good soil, better optics. She spoke in glossy numbers, influencer metrics, potential partnerships with cruelty-free denim brands. No one noticed the 2 empty seats at the table, both investor reps who'd sold their voting shares last week to shell entities, owned by me. When Evelyn finished, someone cleared their throat. It was Albert Grant, the most senior board member, and the man Harold once called his agricultural conscience. Evelyn, he said, voice measured, your last quarter fell 18%. That's the worst in company history. She began to object, but he raised a hand. We voted to table this presentation for one reason. A formal motion has been introduced. He slid a folder across the table. Evelyn opened it. She froze, then blinked once, twice. You're voting to remove me as CEO. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. A junior board member passed a folded slip to the secretary. One by one, the votes were cast. Final tally, 7-2. Evelyn Holden was officially out. No press release, just a quiet escort to the elevator. The company's top PR rep later told CNBC she had stepped back to explore new horizons. But inside the walls of Holden Grove, everyone knew she hadn't just been dethroned, she'd been outgrown. Meanwhile, East Lot rebranded its product line, Whitmore Select, with a subtitle in Harold's handwriting, Planted in Truth. Grown with grit. The first shipment of Whitmore carrots sold out in 36 hours. I didn't gloat, didn't post, didn't tweet. I just sent Evelyn a small wooden box. Inside, one heirloom radish, a printed graph of East Lot's first profit quarter, and a note, handwritten. The roots always remember who watered them. She never replied, but her brother Drew did. With one word, respect. Couldn't beat me in business, so they tried the courts, again. This time, the accusation was venomous. Undue influence. They claimed I manipulated Harold in his final months, that I took advantage of his condition to secure patents, trust revisions, and financial control. They wanted the patents voided, East Lot investigated, and me labeled a fraud. Their new attorney opened his arguments like it was a movie. Your Honor, this is a story of betrayal. A young man who earned an old man's trust, and then robbed his grave. I sat still, expressionless, because I knew what Lena was holding. When it was our turn, she stood calmly, opened a manila folder, and said, Your Honor, we'd like to submit one video. A flash drive was plugged in, a courtroom monitor blinked alive. There, in 4K clarity, Harold Whitmore sat on a porch. His voice, strong, date stamped, 6 months before he died. I've seen what Drew and Evelyn would do with my legacy, but Nathan's the only one who gets it. If something happens to me, I want him to lead. Not because he's family, but because he earned it. This is my wish. On camera, no script, just truth. The courtroom was silent. No legal argument could unwrite that. The judge looked up. This is enough. Motion dismissed. Again, but I wasn't done. Outside the courtroom, a reporter asked me, Nathan, do you feel vindicated? I shook my head. Vindicated is when they say you were right. Legacy is when you don't need to. Later that night, I visited the orchard, the old one on the far eastern plot. The first trees Harold and I ever planted together. The harvest was early this year. As I picked one perfect pear from the branch, I remembered something he once said. The thing about liars, they don't know how long roots can wait. I looked up at the stars, and I smiled. Harold kept a black leather notebook. Not a journal, a ledger. Old school, ink-stained, barely legible in places. But inside, every acre mattered. One page was marked with a single gold star in the top corner. Parcel hashtag 742-113. Location, Solano Backridge. Status, held privately under Legacy Reserve. No one in the family ever talked about that land. It wasn't on Holden Grove's official portfolio, but I remembered it. It was the first piece Harold ever bought, before the name, the company, the empire. He once whispered to me after a long harvest day, if everything burns, you start again there. That land knows me, and so I did. At the county office, the clerk squinted at the screen, confused. Says it's in trust. No recent tax payments. Looks like it's going up for public auction next month. I wired the funds that afternoon. It was mine by Thursday. I didn't tell anyone. Not Gabriel, not Lena, not even the team. I drove out there myself. What I found, old irrigation pipes, a crumbling fence, wild vines, still clinging to forgotten trellises, but the soil, alive. I started clearing it by hand, one row at a time. Planted a single row of heirloom tomatoes with the same seeds Harold gave me in a brown paper envelope years ago. A month later, they sprouted. 2 months later, they were perfect. I built a research station on the hill, glass-walled, solar-powered, named Harold Legacy Labs. He didn't announce it, but word spread. Scientists, growers, educators, they came quietly, walked the land, tested the soil, left notes that said things like, unusually nutrient stable. This field has memory. They were right. Then came the message from Evelyn. You bought that land. Seriously, it's worthless. Congrats, King of Dirt. I replied with a photo of Harold's notebook, open to the page marked, hashtag 742-113. Caption, not worthless. just priceless to the right hands. She never answered, but I know she saw it, because 3 days later, her last corporate donor pulled funding, and East Lot got a call from Stanford Agriculture, asking if we'd host their next Field Innovation Summit. We said yes, and I buried a copy of the old Halden Grove logo at the back edge of the plot, like a fossil, or a warning. Envelope came certified, no note, no apology, just a lawyer's letterhead and 2 words, irreconcilable differences. She'd waited until the media cooled, until her public image was in free fall and there was nothing left for me to embarrass. Now she wanted out. I expected it. I just didn't care anymore. But I did care about the contract I kept in a fireproof drawer, the one Harold signed 3 months before his death. Not a will, not a trust, a corporate contingency agreement. It read, in the event of mismanagement, ethics violations, or strategic deviation from core agricultural mission, I, Harold Whitmore, assign full rights of reinstatement and operational control to Nathan Blake. 3 board members had countersigned, legally binding, buried beneath HR files Evelyn never reviewed. I scanned it, printed a fresh copy, slid it into a branded envelope from East Lot Labs, along with a post-it. You wanted something permanent. So did your father. Then I mailed it. 3 days later, her attorney called Lena. His voice cracked halfway through the call, asked if there was any room for negotiation. There wasn't. When the court date came, she walked in with 3 stylists, 2 assistants, and a face like she was bracing for war. I came in alone. She got the house. I let her. She got the cars. I didn't drive anymore. But the board at Halden Grove, the brand name, the voting proxy she'd clung to like armor, nullified, per the contract. Afterward, I walked past her in the courthouse corridor. She didn't meet my eyes, but she whispered, was it worth it? I paused, then answered, you burned my name off your family tree. I just planted one of my own, and I walked out into the wind. No cameras, no statements, just freedom, and the hum of something real growing beneath my feet. That summer, the tomatoes from parcel #742-113 went viral. It started with a quiet video from a Michelin chef in Healdsburg. He sliced one open like it was a diamond, whispered, this tastes like memory. Within 48 hours, orders quadrupled. Whitmore Select trended on food forums nationwide. NPR ran a story, the tomato that beat $1 billion family. I didn't do interviews, but I let the food speak. And it spoke like Harold, honest, sharp, with a kick of truth in the aftertaste. At the field's edge, I built a bench. Simple wood, no plaque. But every Friday night, I sat there alone, boots in the soil, eyes on the rows. One evening, Gabriel brought a bottle of wine. He poured us each a glass and said, you ever gonna stop? I looked at the fields, at the silent pride stitched into every green vine. This is stopping. Then came the invitation from the California Agricultural Hall of Heritage. They wanted to honor Whitmore Select for innovative land restoration and cross-generational sustainability. And me, they wanted to give me the Harold Whitmore Agrarian Legacy Award. I went, not to speak, just to watch his name, our name, go up in gold. During the applause, I caught Evelyn in the back row. She clapped, just once, no tears, no words, but her eyes said it all. She didn't lose to spite, she lost to roots. On my way out, the event manager handed me a sealed letter. From the Halden Grove board, we'd like to buy East Lot, merge the brands, let the family legacy heal. I burned the letter that night, under the stars, on parcel #742-113, because some land was never for sale. He stopped calling, stopped suing, stopped offering deals wrapped in apologies. Halden Grove's name still existed, on the labels of shrinking supermarket shelves and half-filled crates at farmers markets. But the legacy, it had moved. One October morning, I opened an envelope from a high school in Modesto. Their senior agriculture class wanted to tour East Lot, said they'd read about the revenge farm that saved a name. I laughed at that, but I said yes. The students came with notebooks and wide eyes, asked questions about soil pH, drone irrigation, climate resilience. But one girl asked something else. Did you grow up wanting to be a farmer? I paused, then answered, no, I just wanted to grow something honest. Turns out, that's the hardest part. After they left, I walked the perimeter of parcel #742-113. The heirloom trees were taller now. The bench I built for Harold sat beneath the shade of a walnut tree we planted together 10 years ago. I reached into the earth with bare hands. The soil was warm, living, grateful. And then, I buried something. A photo of Harold and me at the first planting. The original, draft 4, of his will. And a page torn from Evelyn's final cease and desist. I folded them gently, sealed in a mason jar, and pressed them deep beneath the roots of the oldest tree. A time capsule, not of pain, but of proof. Proof that sometimes, the past needs to be buried, so the future can breathe. The wind picked up, and for the first time since Harold's voice went silent, I didn't feel alone. A year passed. East Lot wasn't just a farm anymore. It became a symbol of what happens when truth is cultivated, of what survives when everything else is stripped away. The first Whitmore Legacy Summit was standing room only. Growers, students, scientists, journalists, they came not for hype, but for roots. Gabriel opened with a soil science keynote. Lena gave a lecture on legal resilience in agricultural startups. And me, I stood in front of the crowd, quiet, hands still calloused, wearing the same work boots I'd worn when I buried Halden Grove's contract. Behind me was a single slide, a picture of the East Lot fields at sunrise. I said 5 words. This is how you endure. Afterward, an old man approached me, said he'd once tried to pitch Halden Grove years ago, got laughed out of the boardroom. He shook my hand. You made the land honest again. That stuck with me. I walked back to parcel #742-113 at dusk. The vines swayed. The bench sat there, empty. So I sat, pulled out Harold's old notebook, the leather cracked, spine held together by time and dirt. Inside was one line I'd never seen before, scribbled on the back page. If legacy is just a name, it dies. But if it's planted right, it remembers. I smiled, closed the book, watched the sun bleed gold across the fields we rebuilt. Because in the end, they tried to erase me. They tried to claim the land, the name, the story. But legacy, it's not what's written, it's what takes root. And tonight, with the wind cutting soft through the rows, the soil said my name back, whispered it like an oath, like a truth it never forgot.